This is Bob Clarkson. We're going to talk today about forgiveness, or maybe unforgiveness. Depends on where you sit as to which way you're going to want to see this, but hopefully it will help. I just left a meeting this morning that the topic was about forgiveness, and one of the men raised his hand and he said he had this talk with God way back when about forgiveness, and one of his comments to God was, God, some things are just unforgivable. And I thought, well, maybe. And maybe from a human perspective. For me, Bob, some things that people might do to me or my family would be unforgivable. From a human perspective, I can't let it go. But we're talking about a larger paradigm than just me and my family, or me and the things you may do that I think you shouldn't have done, and you need to apologize. But I'm certainly not going to apologize, not going to forgive you if you don't apologize, and probably won't anyway, because it's an amazing thing how we come to the conclusion that someone needs to be punished by our unforgiveness. But I'm going to throw a few thoughts at you. Some things are unforgivable. Well, we're afraid to forgive because that might be saying, well, what you did was okay. Well, that's not true. Or, I can't forgive you when I'm going to try to forget this whole episode because it really bothers me when I keep thinking about it. Now, that's still not the answer. I'm not going to forgive you because I need to hold you accountable. I need to hold you responsible to act in a responsible relational way. Well, again, that's kind of crossing a border we've talked about before. If I think I'm your boss and I can tell you what you should or shouldn't do and hold you accountable to my thinking, those are like declarations of war, like I'm supposed to be your king. You know, somebody else died and I became God or something, and so you got to report to me and you have to do what I say. And yet most of us operate that way because we know best. Or some things I'm not going to be willing to forgive because you just need to suffer. I want you to suffer more than I did. All right. Well, then where does grace come in? Well, I've noticed in many situations where my brothers and sisters in Christ are willing to show grace to someone else who has failed or sinned or created an egregious sin, as long as the sin that the other person has committed is not lower than my worst case sin. So my grace will probably stop dispensing itself as soon as what you're doing is worse than what I've already received grace for. I might let you have the same grace I got, but I'm not going to let you have more. But how often does that really work for anybody? But staying on that topic for a minute, grace is not a relative term, and grace is never earned, and grace is automatic when love is unconditional. Well, what do I mean by that? The parents of criminals who keep going with them to the courtroom to hear the proceedings and hear the sentence that their particular child is going to be having to endure, it's the love of the family that causes them to be there, and the love of the family that doesn't want their child to have to suffer. They want their kid to be forgiven, even if he's an egregious serial murderer. Somehow the parents think their child shouldn't have to pay for that. But obviously, if it's their child who committed the infraction, I want them to pay. Well, so when you think about God, He doesn't want any of His children to suffer, but He knows that we have to. So my unforgiveness is something that festers in my soul it erodes my happiness, and it actually hinders my acceptance of God's forgiveness for me. What? Yeah. Well, flashback again. I don't want them to get away with this. If God forgives the villain, the victims don't get justice. If God forgives this guy who raped my daughter, I don't get justice and my daughter doesn't get justice. Well, we have a misunderstanding of forgiveness as God sees it. Now I will say this, and we would all say this. Regardless of God's forgiveness, natural consequences still remain. Rarely does God get us out of a speeding ticket. Rarely does he get us out of committing a crime of murder. When we're convicted, we go to prison, etc. But forgiveness is not about temporal issues. Okay, so how does forgiveness actually work? Does forgiveness mean that you just go scot-free and no punishment happens? Well, again, that wouldn't be justice for the victims. If God just let all of these egregious crimes go unpunished, but in a very real sense, the forgiveness of God has nothing to do with the forgiveness of men. We get that all clustered up, and it doesn't belong there. God's forgiveness is not about temporal issues. It's not about just normal everyday living wherever we happen to be on the planet. God's concerned about forgiveness in an eternal spiritual sense. When we're talking about the forgiveness of Jesus, the forgiveness of God, the forgiveness that the whole Bible is talking about, it's all about the forgiveness of sins from a spiritual and eternal perspective. All the way back into the Old Testament, all the way back to the Jews, all the way back to their sacrifices of animals, all the way back to the annual sacrifice, the Kippur of Yom Kippur, where the sacrifice was made in the Holy of Holies one time a year by the high priest for all of the people. But it's about the spiritual aspect of the forgiveness, the eternal aspect of the forgiveness, not the temporal. And even in Judaism, just because God forgave an egregious sin when the sacrifice was applied, the blood was applied, it didn't mean that the people who committed murder didn't get murdered for it or suffer the consequences of the legal system of Judaism at the time. Well, we get all kind of wrapped around the axles about stuff like that, and it's rather unfortunate. Now, I want to look at something here that there are natural consequences, but as I said, the forgiveness in the Bible is about the spiritual crimes. And what is a spiritual crime anyway? Well, we look at crimes as things that hurt people. Well, in the physical, in the temporal, in the everyday living experience with regular courts and justice systems and prisons, that fits. Well, God is looking at it from a perspective of relationship. Now, what is the eternal consequence of sin as God sees sin from an eternal spiritual perspective? Well, the only thing I can think of is this one word, hell, that some people say, I don't believe in hell, and some people say I do. But it's not about the burning fires of hell. It's not about the issues of inflicting pain. It's about the presence of God or the absence of that presence of God. So spiritual crimes are actually crimes against relationship. If you look at the Ten Commands, all 10 are talking about consequences, about breaking relationship, and there being a consequence for doing that. The first one starts out, "You shall have no other gods before me." God's first statement that he's to be number one. As you go through the list, the first 4 are about breaking relationship with God and what he says about relationship with him. The last 6 are about breaking relationship with other human beings. Whoa. Well, I will admit, I used to see sin as breaking the 10 commandments and things that are akin to those. Kind of a moral quotient. And the problem with that, quite frankly, is every religion seems to have its own particular prescribed 10 commands, or 10 plus however many more they might add, in terms of moral code and how to treat people from a moral, ethical, and legal perspective. But on some core issues, I think all of the religions of the world and most of the people of the world agree on some of the core issues, but there's a lot of latitude there. But if I'm in a Muslim country and I speak something that's disrespectful of the Quran, even if I don't know it, I get to go to prison for 10 years. And as a non-Muslim, I can't even defend myself in a court because non-Muslims are not allowed to speak in a courtroom. So it's almost like you're just dead and stinking. There's no way you can get away from that consequence, but it's related to their particular mores that aren't the same as ours. We don't do that when people disrespect our Holy Bible. We don't hold them in contempt and throw them in prison for 10 years and give them no voice. Nor does God. Now, the whole point of this is to get back around to forgiveness is not about temporal issues, but we keep trying to commingle or mix in physical, material, and temporal consequences with spiritual consequences, and they're not related in any way. Now, God rarely, if ever, will forgive you a speeding ticket so you don't have to pay it, or let you off the hook of drunk driving DUI kind of thing, or whatever. He could intervene. He might somehow touch the heart of a judge or something, and somehow at a rare occasion he might do that. But he has a specific purpose. But by and large, he doesn't mess with those things. They're not of any consequence to him. So let's go back then. What is sin really about? Well, let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning, in the heavens, before any humans were ever created, before any angels were ever created, holiness was there. Sin was not there. Forgiveness had no place there. But let's start with holiness. What is holiness? We think it's some kind of self-righteous, sanctimonious whiteness of being faithful to the tenets of our religion. No. Holiness in God's economy and his definition is everything in right relationship. Now, that gives rise to what on earth was God thinking when he made humans in his own image to have the capacities that he has and the capacities that we now do have to commit sin by breaking relationship. And let's go back to some of the simple things you won't forgive people for. The low-level things. Well, so-and-so said this and it hurt my feelings, and I'm not going to forgive him. Well, sin is breaking relationship. Okay, let's say the other person said something that hurt your feelings, but it was said in a public setting and the other 9 people in the room were not affected by it at all. Then who broke relationship? You. You're the only one. I won't have anything to do with him. He owes me an apology. I won't forgive him. That was awful. He hurt my feelings. Well, sin is breaking relationships, so it's on the back of the one who actually walks away from the relationship, not the one who said something that the one who walked away blamed them for. And we waste a whole lot of time blaming a whole lot of people for stuff they didn't even have anything to do with. Crimes they didn't even forget, they didn't even commit. But forgiveness is another issue as well. Forgiveness is about who pays the penalty. It's not about, okay, I come to Jesus, I say the prayer, I'm behind bars for life for murdering someone, and God wipes the slate clean. No, God didn't. Every sin that has ever been committed, from Adam and Eve to Bob Clarkson and everyone else alive on the planet today, is going to pay. There will be a penalty for their spiritual breaking relationship crimes. Now, the penalty is either paid for by me, myself, you, yourself, or it can be paid for by Jesus. So forgiveness, as God sees it, is not just letting it go. It's like the old motorcycle guys who, guy runs out of gas. The other guy drives back to the nearest gas station, buys a 2-liter, dumps the stuff out, fills it with gas, comes back, pitches the man the 2-liter bottle of gas and says, "Pay it forward." What's he mean? Well, I was kind to you, you be kind to the next guy. All right? Well, here's how God sees forgiveness. He's not letting it go, because if he just let it go, the victims of the crime of murder or rape or whatever it was don't get justice. And God is a perfectly just being and demands justice in every situation. So what do we have? Forgiveness in God's eternal perspective is that we have the opportunity to pay our sin forward to Jesus Christ, who was massacred on a cross, naked, buried, and then, thank God, he was raised from the dead. But Jesus paid for the penalties of anyone and everyone. However, for me to get the benefit of that applied to my eternal destiny, Scripture is very clear. Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him, you have to believe that Jesus is God, came from God, died in our place with a sinless, godly sinlessness, and therefore could be the substitutionary payer of our debt. All sins were paid for, but only those who call on Jesus and offer their faith in him and trust in him as the only begotten Son of God to pay for their sins have that applied to their eternal destination. So if you believe about God, you believe about Jesus, you believe Jesus is God, whatever, but you haven't actually said, I receive your forgiveness, your payment of my sin. And you authorize that, just like you would authorize surgery in a surgical suite with a doctor. He will not cut on you unless you give him written permission to do the surgery. And the same applies with the salvation paradigm. Without my expressed permission for Jesus to apply his payment of my sin to me, it won't happen. It's not that the sin wasn't paid for by Jesus, but your access to the eternal destiny, the eternal destination of God's presence forever after this life is over, hinges on your own acceptance or rejection of that substitutionary payment. Now, Moving on from here, penalty of sin is separation from God. And we think about, oh, we got this idea out here that, hey, I'm just going to die and I'm just going to go on with my poker buddies and go to Las Vegas in the skies or in wherever that is and just keep carousing for the rest of my life. Not going to happen. You're either present with God or you're absent from God. There's only two places to be. And the key is, the most essential thing, the most important thing to every human being is not to be alone. To have at least one person, one other being that accepts and embraces them. So hell would be if there were no fires like some people believe the words of God say. If just being completely alone and you can't be in relationship with anybody else for the rest of eternity would be hell for me, would be hell for any of us. So I'm going to read some words here from a song that really means a lot to me. It's a song by Matthew West, and it's, if I can find the words here, here we go, okay. It's the hardest thing to give away, and the last thing on your mind today. It always goes to those who don't deserve. It's the opposite of how you feel when the pain they cause is just too real. It takes everything you have to say the word, forgiveness. It flies in the face of all your pride, and it moves away the mad inside. It's always anger's own worst enemy. And even when the jury and the judge say you've got a right to hold a grudge, it's the whisper in your ear saying, set it free. Forgiveness. I'm going to finish that. Show me how to love the unlovable. Show me how to reach the unreachable. Help me now to do the impossible. Forgiveness. Help me now to do the impossible. It'll clear the bitterness away. It can even set the prisoner free. There is no end to what its power can do. So let it go and be amazed by what you see through eyes of grace. The prisoner that really frees is you. Forgiveness. I want finally to set it free. Show me how to see what your mercy sees, God. Help me now to give what you gave to me. Forgiveness. And I'll add this one final note. This makes it a little bit long, but here we go. Most of the time, the people I held in unforgiveness had never done anything that required my forgiveness because they hadn't done anything wrong. They may have said something that hurt my feelings, but there was no malice intended toward me in their hearts. So unless there's malice intended, there's not a sin committed. And if I held people, I'll tell you what, when I realized that, a whole bunch of forgiveness happened instantly. I threw it out. I threw those things all out. It was my problem. They just happened to bump into a bruise that someone else caused. Start there. Give up on all those things that you can possibly say they probably didn't have any ill feelings toward me. No malice. They weren't trying to hurt me. Let those go. And then ask the Holy Spirit to let the rest of them go. This is Bob Clarkson. I hope that helps.